Producers always ask, what's the place to find premium, high quality, ultra rare samples for beat making? Well, today I'm going to share a secret with you. Down in the description box below, I've compiled a master list of channels with more than 100,000 samples, and you can download this list for free. And before you turn your nose up to sampling off of YouTube, if a legend like Madlib does it, you should too. So go ahead and download this list, and while you do that, let's make a beat using one of these samples. This sample comes from my own personal favorite channel, which is included in this list, Vinyl Archaeology. So let's see what we can do with this sample here. I'll start by loading it up in my sampler and just placing random chops for now. Now, as I go through these random chops, what I'm doing is listening for the keys in the low end. I've talked about this before. A good approach when sampling is to focus on building a progression first. So to do this, I'm paying attention to the underlying instruments in the low mids. And I think these chops here will work to build a good progression. I know right now it kind of sounds awkward and hard to hear, but if I use an EQ to remove all of the other sounds, you can hopefully hear the progression I've come up with. But currently there are a few problems with this loop that I've built. So number one, that vocal in this loop sounds too overpowering to me. So what I'm gonna do is remove it. And I can do this by simply just using stem splitting. So that's one problem solved, but as you've probably also heard, there is another issue that I need to fix, which is that this loop is uneven. If you pay close attention to these two chops here, they have that bowed Indian instrument playing on top, which is creating a lot more high end, while these chops over here don't have as much of that high end presence. And this is making my loop sound unbalanced. Now again, I could just EQ everything out from the high end, so I'm just left with those keys, but I actually do like how that layer of high end sounds. I feel like it could add a lot more character to the beat. So instead of removing the high end from the last two chops, I'll instead add high end to the first two chops. And here's how I'm gonna do this. I will duplicate my sample, then I'm gonna use an EQ to remove everything but the high end. Then from here, I'll find chops that I can layer on top of those first two chops where the beat lacks that high-end presence. This is sounding much better to me. Again, this is how it would have sounded before. It feels unbalanced, whereas after, much more even. From here, I'm going to add tape emulation to get this to sound rougher and more old school. What this is basically doing is bringing everything more closer into a mono presence, and it's making this loop sound warmer, meaning it emphasizes the low-mid instruments and then de-emphasizes the high-end brightness. So far, I like the way this loop is sounding. It feels somewhat Dilla-esque. So I'm going to lean into this and use some J Dilla ideas for the rest of this beat. To start, I will use this synth bass to build a bass line. I know Pigments has some good synth basses in it. This one feels very subby, almost mogy, so I think it will do. In terms of the pattern itself, I want to create short, jumpy notes, similar to what Dilla does all over Fantastic Volume 2.
You ain't gotta play hard to get. I know you like the art of sex. I'm putting down my plan like an architect.
And to figure out what notes to use to actually build this pattern and have it work with my sample, I'm going to use Note Grabber. This is my plugin that I built that easily shows you every single note inside of a sample. And this is going to help me build a bass line that actually uses the correct notes. I can see the root note for this first part of the loop is an A. We also have a C sharp and then an E. And later we have a C, D sharp, and an F sharp. And by just knowing all the notes that exist in your sample, it can just be a major help to build actual patterns at work. And if you download that sample master list, I am throwing in a free 14-day trial to use NoteGrabber if you're interested. Anyways, back to the beat. By using all of this information from NoteGrabber, here is the pattern that I have built. Now, while I like this pattern, I do think the beat needs more presence in that low end. So let's grab a lighter, less subby bass guitar to do this. And to go along with my subby bass line, I'm going to create a much more basic, simple layer of light bass just to help this loop feel more complete. Alright, now I feel all the musical parts of this beat are finished. Let's move on to the drums. To start, I'm gonna go look through my list of drum loops here. And right now, I'm less interested in finding a drum loop that fits perfectly and sounds great instantly, and I'm more just looking for drum textures that I just like. And I think these drum textures here sound good with my loop. So I'm going to take this drum loop and bring it into a basic slicing tool. This isolates each drum hit, helping me build my own pattern. And one thing I want to point out is that with this pattern, I have some sounds being perfectly on time while others are off grid. You can see my snares hit a little bit early, but my kicks are perfectly quantized. I know some people recommend having everything off grid and unquantized to get that extremely sloppy feel, but if you do this and you don't get a result that you're happy with, what I like to do is just build context. Meaning by having some sound in your beat be perfectly on time, it can help the other sounds actually feel loose. Whereas if everything sounds loose and off grid, the listener just doesn't have any context and everything can at times sound too chaotic. Anyways, with this beat right now, I feel like my kick is lacking a bit of thump. So I will layer this other kick underneath. And now all that's left is my hi-hat pattern. In terms of the actual texture, I don't like how this hi-hat sounds for my current drum loop. I have an idea in my head right now for a dense hi-hat pattern, and this hi-hat feels a bit too full. So instead, let's look for another drum loop to find a different hi-hat. This hi-hat here feels far less present and far less full. And this will help me not overwhelm the beat with this somewhat dense, unusual hi-hat pattern that I've built here. Now one last thing, I think adding in an open hi-hat would be a cool idea, so let's do that. And one thing that I like to do in a situation like this is layer with my other hi-hats. As of right now, this open hi-hat sounds very different than my current hi-hat that I'm using. They are two completely different sounding textures. So what I'm going to do is duplicate my open hi-hat and change its shape so it sounds like a regular hi-hat. And then I will build a simple secondary hi-hat pattern using this sound. My hope is that this open hi-hat won't sound so far and so different from the rest of my drum sounds now. And there we go. I like the way this beat sounds. Again, to download this list of 100,000 samples, click the box next to me, and you'll also get a free 14-day trial to my plugin with it. If you like this video, hit like and subscribe. Otherwise, I will talk to you next time. Bye for now.